The last piece of our puzzle of economic growth is institutions. Institutions are the formal and informal rules governing the organization of a society, including its laws and regulations. Institutions are important because they create the incentives that people face. For example, when we talk about institutions, we aren't just talking about the legal and political system that gives you the right to start a business, but also the regulations and legal hurdles you face when trying to start that business for real, and the social pressures you might face as well. When institutions encourage innovation and help people to try new ideas, allowing them to fail or succeed on their own merits via free markets and consumer demand, then economic growth becomes possible. But if institutions discourage competition, pick winners, or allow only certain people to start businesses while others are denied out of prejudice or class, then growth is very unlikely. In our modern times, debates often rage about the quality of our institutions. Many people don't like the free market and want to see lots of government intervention and regulation in the name of protecting jobs or helping the poor. But these interventions rarely succeed as intended. Likewise, others want our institutions to protect a, quote, way of life and support one group at the expense of other groups. This too is a recipe for disaster when it comes to economic growth. The difference between good institutions for growth and bad can literally be seen from space. Viewed from orbit, the Korean peninsula is visibly divided at night. South Korea is lit up with economic prosperity, filled with wealthy cities and human flourishing. North Korea, on the other hand, is almost completely dark, except for the capital city of Pyongyang, where all economic activity is directed from. In 1947, Korea was split along the 38th parallel by the US and the Soviet Union. Prior to this, Korea had been one country. They had the same climate and geography, and they had a fairly homogeneous culture, especially economically. Nevertheless, after more than 70 years, the two countries have gone down two very different paths. GDP per capita in South Korea is well over $35,000 today, while in North Korea, it remains at the subsistence level of around $1,800. This is what economists often call a natural experiment, an event which happens that splits similar people into two groups and changes something for one of the groups. The differences we see over time should then be a result of that change. In the case of Korea, the change wasn't in geography or in culture, but rather in their institutions. In South Korea, the US installed a government which supported a market-based economy. Initially, growth was slow, as the US had installed a military dictator. But when South Korea finally broke free of that and instituted their own democracy, growth and innovation has flourished, and the commitment to the market-based economy strengthened. Today, South Korea has a huge cultural footprint, with K-pop and other music becoming global sensations, and a film industry which has been pumping out masterpiece after masterpiece. Bong Joon-ho's 2019 film Parasite was the first non-English film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. And all of that doesn't even mention business mega successes like LG, Samsung, Hyundai, and Kia. Odds are pretty good that you have more than one product of South Korea in your house right now, and you may even be watching this video on one of their devices. Heck, I'm reading my little script here off my Samsung monitor. 3 cheers for that. Contrast this with North Korea, which adopted communism and a powerful state dictatorship. North Korea implemented the Chu-Chae system under Kim Il-sung, which translates roughly to self-reliance. It's a political philosophy that the country should be politically, militarily, and economically independent. The government controls every aspect of the economy, setting prices, telling you what your job is and what to produce, and providing you with the compensation they designate. They control what you eat, what you see, and what you do. Everything is designed to serve the power structure controlled by the Kim family, and they use what little productive capacity the country has to produce enormously wasteful military projects to antagonize the world with. Where most countries set rules on who is allowed to move in, North Korea has to strictly guard their borders to prevent people from leaving. People who are trying to flee political persecution, which put their families in brutal prison camps, or the frequent famines that an unknown number of people have died from, because the North Korean government goes to great lengths to hide the dysfunction. I'm willing to say it. Life in North Korea is objectively worse than life in South Korea. There is no dimension on which North Korea is succeeding unless you are part of the ruling family. And the reason is the institutions which formed and which are reinforced by the incentives every person in the country faces to keep quiet and not dissent or challenge the status quo. We can see this story again in the Caribbean. Haiti and the Dominican Republic share an island, but the standard of living in the two countries has diverged greatly since the 1960s. In the Dominican Republic, they adopted institutions which supported entrepreneurship and a market economy. They invested in human capital through education, achieving 99% literacy compared to 61% in Haiti. They invested in physical capital like roads and promoted trade with other nations. Their government has maintained political stability and low inflation. They've been rewarded with an economy that has lifted the typical person out of poverty and into the middle class. In Haiti, there's been no economic progress at all, with GDP per capita only sufficient to provide the typical person with $3 or so per day. When an earthquake hit Haiti in 2010, the damage was immense and the death toll tragic. Without any modern infrastructure, there was nothing to protect people. And so 200,000 people died because political instability, poor land use management, and corrupt leaders have kept the nation in poverty, with institutions that benefit the ruling class at the expense of everyone else. The thing about institutions is that they're hard to get right and even harder to keep in place, but they are an indispensable cornerstone of economic growth.